The sound came at 8:47 p.m. Not a gunshot, not a threat, just the wet, choking gasp of a man who couldn't breathe. Crystal glasses froze mid-toast at Castello Rosso, the city's most exclusive Italian restaurant where reservations required both money and connections that went far beyond what appeared on any tax return. But this sound cut through the ambient murmur of power and privilege like a blade through silk. Leonardo Gatti, feared Mafia boss, controller of half the city's underworld, sat across from Alia Perez in her crimson dress that matched the velvet curtains. He had been mid-sentence, discussing a territorial agreement that would shift millions in revenue, when the piece of dry-aged steak lodged in his throat with the finality of a vault door slamming shut. His hand flew to his neck. His eyes widened. Alia's carefully maintained smile fractured into genuine panic. The entire restaurant's ambient noise dropped by half as people recognized something was catastrophically wrong at the boss's table. Marcus, Leonardo's bodyguard, was at his side in seconds, but his hands hovered uselessly. What do you do when the untouchable is dying? Someone call a doctor, Alia screamed, her composure shattering completely. Giuseppe, the restaurant manager, ran toward them, shouting orders. Doctor! Vincent Morrison, the physician, kept on retainer specifically for emergencies like this, rushed from the private dining room where he'd been enjoying his own meal. Leonardo's vision began to darken at the edges. His thoughts scattered like broken glass. This is how it ends, choking in a restaurant like some amateur. If you're still here right now, don't blink, subscribe and stay with me, because what saves him tonight will rewrite everything you think you know about power. Dr. Morrison positioned himself behind Leonardo, executing perfect Heimlich maneuvers once, twice, 3 times, nothing. The obstruction didn't budge. Marcus and another bodyguard, Tony, attempted to help, but their size and rising panic made them clumsy. The doctor tried again, his face reddening with effort and humiliation. Still, nothing. Leonardo's consciousness began to fade. Through the growing darkness, he saw a face he hadn't seen in 20 years, his mother, Francesca Gatti, standing between 2-year-old Leonardo and his drunk, violent father, Antonio. He watched her take the blow meant for him, watched her collapse, watched her die in the hospital from internal bleeding, whispering, "Promise me, you'll be strong. Promise me, you'll protect those who can't protect themselves." He had spent 2 decades building walls around that promise, convincing himself that protection meant power, that caring made you vulnerable, that showing mercy was weakness. Until tonight, a calm voice cut through the chaos. Quiet but absolute. "Move aside. I can help him." Every head turned. Dr. Morrison started to protest, but the woman's eyes, warm but unyielding, stopped him cold. Anna Phillips stood there in her simple black and white uniform, dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, hands calloused from years of hard work. She stepped forward with the kind of calm that only comes from someone who's faced worse than a room full of armed criminals. "Who is this waitress to think she knows better than a trained physician?" Dr. Morrison sputtered. But Anna's gaze met Leonardo's fading eyes, and something in her expression, absolute certainty without arrogance, made Marcus step back. Leonardo felt her hands position themselves differently than the doctor's had. One hand flat against his solar plexus, the other pressing specific points along his diaphragm that she'd learned from her Bedouin grandmother during childhood summers in Jordan. "This is going to feel strange," Anna said quietly. "But trust me, the technique was older than modern medicine, passed down through generations of healers who understood the body's pressure points in ways Western science was only beginning to rediscover. One sharp, upward thrust combined with precise pressure point activation and the obstruction dislodged." Leonardo gasped, air flooding back into his lungs like resurrection itself. The restaurant erupted in relieved chaos. Alia was crying. Dr. Morrison looked humiliated. Marcus and Tony exchanged glances that said, "We owe this woman everything." Leonardo's first words. Voice. Hoarse. "What's your name?" End. "Anna Phillips, sir." Just catch your breath. "You're going to be fine." She started to walk away back to her section. Back to serving tables, as if saving a mafia boss's life was just another Tuesday. Leonardo watched her go. Something shifting in his chest that had nothing to do with the choking. Who is this woman who showed no fear, expected no reward, and walked away? As the ambulance sirens grew closer and Giuseppe fussed over him with apologies and offers of complimentary meals, Leonardo made a decision that would change everything. He needed to know who Anna Phillips really was. Because in that moment when everyone else had failed, when modern medicine and expensive expertise had proven useless, a simple waitress with calloused hands had saved his life using wisdom passed down from desert healers. And Leonardo Gatti never forgot a debt. What happens when the most powerful man in the city discovers the waitress who saved him is fighting a battle far more desperate than anything in his criminal empire? Stay with me. Because what Leonardo finds out about Anna will make him question everything he thought he knew about strength, power, and what it really means to protect someone. Before we continue, don't forget to like this video, hit subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Now, let's get into the story. Leonardo's world narrowed to a single terrible reality. He couldn't breathe. The stake lodged in his throat felt like concrete, immovable and absolute. His fingers clawed at his collar, ripping the silk tie loose in a desperate gesture that accomplished nothing. Marcus reached him within seconds, his massive frame blocking out the chandelier light. But the bodyguard's hands hovered uselessly in the air, his face pale with a terror Leonardo had never seen before. Marcus had taken bullets for him, broken bones defending him, faced down armed rivals without flinching. This was watching the most powerful man he knew, rendered completely helpless by something as simple as food. "Boss." Marcus's voice cracked. He grabbed Leonardo's shoulders, then released them, then grabbed them again. "What do I do? Tell me what to do." Leonardo tried to speak, to give orders the way he always did, but no sound came out except a wet, choking rasp that made nearby diners push back from their tables in horror. Aaliyah's scream cut through the restaurant like shattering glass. "Somebody help him! He's dying! Oh God, he's dying!" Her perfectly manicured hands flew to her face, smearing mascara across her cheeks. The woman who had spent the entire evening radiating calculated elegance now looked like a child, confronting something she couldn't control or manipulate with beauty alone. Giuseppe appeared from nowhere, his normally composed face twisted with panic. The restaurant manager had served mob bosses, politicians, and celebrities for 20 years without breaking a sweat. But watching Leonardo Gatti choke to death in his establishment would end more than just his career. "Call 911, he shouted to no one and everyone. "Get an ambulance! Move!" Waiters scattered in different directions. The organized chaos of emergency response collided with the paralysis of people who understood they were witnessing something that could have consequences far beyond one man's life. Then Dr. Vincent Morrison burst through the crowd, his napkin still tucked into his collar from his interrupted meal. The physician had been kept on Castello Rosso's payroll specifically for moments like this, though in 5 years he'd never actually needed to intervene. He pushed Marcus aside with surprising strength and positioned himself behind Leonardo. "I've got him," Morrison announced with the confidence of a man whose medical degree had cost more than most people's houses. "Everyone, step back. Give him room." But as the doctor wrapped his arms around Leonardo's chest and executed the first Heimlich thrust, something became immediately, terrifyingly clear. His confidence meant nothing. The obstruction wasn't moving. Dr. Morrison's arms locked around Leonardo's chest, positioning with textbook precision. The first thrust came sharp and upward, exactly as taught in every medical training manual. Nothing happened. The second thrust followed immediately. Harder this time. Desperate force replacing clinical technique. The obstruction remained lodged like a stone in concrete. "Come on," Morrison muttered through gritted teeth, repositioning for a third attempt. His face was crimson now, sweat beading across his forehead. The thrust came with enough force to lift Leonardo slightly off his feet, but the result was the same. Nothing. The piece of steak might as well have been welded to his throat. Leonardo's vision began to darken at the edges, black creeping inward like ink spilled across paper. Sound became distant and muffled, as if he were sinking underwater. His thoughts scattered in fragments. This is how it ends. Not in a shootout. Not in a betrayal. Choking in a restaurant like some amateur who doesn't know how to chew his food. The absurdity of it would have been funny if he weren't dying. Marcus grabbed Leonardo from one side, while Tony, another bodyguard, seized him from the other. Both men were built like freight trains, their combined strength capable of breaking down reinforced doors or subduing armed attackers. But now their size worked against them. They bumped into Dr. Morrison, disrupting his rhythm. Their panic made their movements jerky and uncoordinated. "Let me work," Morrison shouted, shoving Tony back. "You're not doing anything," Marcus roared back. "He's dying." Leonardo felt his knees beginning to buckle. The restaurant's crystal chandeliers blurred into starbursts of light that reminded him of something. Some memory clawing its way up from the depths he'd buried it in. Then the darkness pulled him under completely. He was 12 years old again, standing in their small kitchen that always smelled like garlic and his father's cheap whiskey. Antonio Gatti loomed over him, massive and swaying, his fist drawn back like a hammer about to fall. Young Leonardo had said something, done something, breathed wrong. It didn't matter anymore, what had triggered the rage. But before the blow could land, his mother stepped between them. Francesca Gatti, barely 5 feet tall, placed herself in front of her son like a human shield. "You want to hit someone, Antonio? Hit me. But you don't touch my boy." The sound of his father's fist connecting with her temple echoed across 20 years. Leonardo watched his mother crumple to the kitchen floor, her dark hair spreading across the linoleum like spilled wine. He watched the ambulance come too late, watched her die in the hospital bed while machines beeped their mechanical countdown. Her last words whispered through the darkness. "Promise me you'll be strong. Promise me you'll protect those who can't protect themselves." He'd made that promise. Then he'd buried it alongside her, convinced that protection meant power and caring made you vulnerable. Until tonight, when dying, he remembered what he'd forgotten. The memory played out with the clarity of a film reel, every detail sharp enough to cut. Antonio's fist had moved in slow motion, a freight train of violence aimed at 12-year-old Leonardo's face. But Francesca had been faster, stepping between them with the kind of fearless love that defied self-preservation. The impact echoed through their tiny kitchen. Her head snapped back, her knees buckled. She hit the linoleum floor with a sound that young Leonardo would hear in his nightmares for decades to come. "Mama!" He dropped beside her, his small hands trying to stem the blood trickling from her ear. "Mama, please get up." Antonio staggered backward, his drunken rage evaporating into something like horror. But it was too late. It had been too late the moment he raised his hand. The ambulance took 17 minutes to arrive. Leonardo counted every second on the kitchen clock, while his mother's breathing grew shallower. Her eyes found his face, focusing with effort. "My brave boy," she whispered. "Don't let this make you hard." But 17 minutes was forever when you were 12, and watching your mother bleed out on the kitchen floor. At the hospital, The machines beeped their mechanical countdown. Francesca's hand felt so small in his, like holding a bird with broken wings. Internal bleeding, the doctors said. Trauma too severe for her body to overcome. The words meant nothing to Leonardo. All he understood was that his mother was leaving him. "Promise me you'll be strong," she breathed, her voice barely audible above the medical equipment. "Promise me you'll protect those who can't protect themselves." Leonardo promised through tears he couldn't stop. It was the last conversation they ever had. The funeral happened on a Tuesday. Rain fell like the sky itself was grieving. Young Leonardo stood beside the casket, in a suit borrowed from a neighbor, and something fundamental died alongside his mother that day. The part of him that believed the world was fair, that good people were safe, that love could protect you from violence. The police investigation went nowhere. Antonio got 6 months for involuntary manslaughter. Served 3. Came out meaner than before. The system that was supposed to protect people like his mother had failed completely. So Leonardo learned to protect himself. He started running errands for local bookmakers at 13, collecting debts at 15, breaking bones at 17. By 20, he'd carved out his own territory through calculated violence and strategic fear. He built his empire on principles forged in his mother's blood. Mercy was weakness that got you killed. Protection meant accumulating enough power that no one dared threaten you. Caring about anyone created vulnerabilities that enemies would exploit without hesitation. For 2 decades, those walls had held firm. Until tonight, when dying in a restaurant, Leonardo remembered the promise he'd buried alongside his mother. The memory shattered like broken glass. Leonardo's consciousness slammed back into the present, into the restaurant. The chaos. The dying. His vision had narrowed to a pinpoint. Darkness closing in from all sides. Dr. Morrison was still positioned behind him, but the physician's movements had grown frantic and uncoordinated. Desperation replacing technique. Leonardo's knees finally gave out. He began to collapse. Then a voice cut through the panic, quiet but absolute. "Move aside. I can help him." The words carried no urgency, no drama. Just the calm certainty of someone stating a simple fact. Every head turned. "Doctor." Morrison's hands froze mid-thrust. Marcus and Tony stepped back instinctively, creating space for whoever had spoken with such unexpected authority. Anna Phillips stood at the edge of the crowd that had formed around Leonardo's table. She wore the restaurant's standard uniform, simple black pants, white button-down shirt, a small apron tied at her waist. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, revealing a face that held more character than conventional beauty. Her hands, visible as she stepped forward, were calloused and work-worn, the hands of someone who knew what real labor felt like. "Excuse me?" Dr. Morrison's voice dripped with indignation. "I'm a board-certified physician. I don't need assistance from— You need assistance from someone who can actually save him," Anna interrupted, her tone still calm but carrying steel underneath. She moved closer, and Leonardo's fading vision managed to focus on her face. Her eyes met his warm, brown, steady, completely unafraid despite the room full of dangerous men surrounding her. There was no arrogance in her expression, no grandstanding or false bravado, just absolute certainty, the kind that came from knowledge tested by experience rather than learned from textbooks. "Who is this waitress to think she knows better than a trained physician?" Morrison sputtered, but his protest sounded hollow even to his own ears. Marcus looked from the doctor to Anna, his instincts warring with protocol. The bodyguard had spent 15 years reading threats, assessing dangers, determining who could be trusted in crisis situations. Something in Anna's calm demeanor, in the confident way She approached a dying mob boss without hesitation and made his decision. "Let her try," Marcus said, stepping aside. Tony followed suit, both bodyguards creating space for this unexpected savior in a waitress uniform. Anna knelt beside Leonardo, her movements efficient and practiced. "This is going to feel strange," she said quietly, positioning her hands in ways that felt completely different from Dr. Morrison's textbook technique. "But trust me." Leonardo, seconds from unconsciousness, had no choice but to trust. His life was in the calloused hands of a woman whose name he didn't even know. Anna positioned herself behind Leonardo with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd performed this exact sequence countless times before. Her movements held none of Dr. Morrison's textbook rigidity, no wasted motion or hesitation. She moved like a craftsman who'd perfected their art through repetition rather than theory. "Deep breath if you can," she said softly. Her left hand pressed flat against Leonardo's solar plexus, fingers spread wide across the center of his chest. But, instead of wrapping her other arm around him the way Morrison had done, Anna's right hand found specific points along his diaphragm pressure points that existed in no Western medical textbook. Her fingers moved with surgical precision, pressing into spaces between ribs that most physicians didn't even know were significant. "My grandmother learned this in the Jordanian desert," Anna murmured, more to herself than anyone listening. Bedouin healers used it long before hospitals existed, before anyone had machines to save lives. The technique had been passed down through generations of women who understood the body not through dissection and study, but through observation and necessity. Desert healers who couldn't afford the luxury of failure, who developed methods that worked when conventional wisdom failed. Anna's fingers found the exact convergence point, where three major nerve clusters met along Leonardo's diaphragm. She pressed firmly, activating pressure points that Western science was only beginning to map and understand. Then, in one smooth motion, she executed an upward thrust that combined the mechanical force of the Heimlich with something older, something that worked with the body's natural systems rather than against them. The effect was immediate and electric. Leonardo felt the pressure point activation like lightning shooting through his chest, his diaphragm contracting in ways it hadn't responded to Morrison's attempts. The ancient technique triggered reflexes that modern medicine had forgotten existed. The obstruction shifted, then dislodged completely. The piece of steak shot from Leonardo's throat like a cork from a bottle, landing somewhere across the restaurant floor with a wet sound that nobody cared about because Leonardo Gatti was gasping air back into his lungs. The sound of that first breath was resurrection itself, raw, desperate, beautiful. Oxygen flooded his system, pushing back the darkness that had been seconds from claiming him. His vision cleared in rushing waves. The restaurant came back into focus, every detail sharp and overwhelming. He was alive. This waitress with calloused hands and ancient knowledge had saved him when modern medicine and expensive expertise had failed completely. Anna stepped back, releasing him gently. "Breathe. Slowly," she instructed, her voice still calm despite having just performed a miracle. "Your throat's going to be sore, but you're going to be fine." The restaurant erupted in relieved chaos. Applause broke out from tables whose occupants had been holding their breath, watching death approach the most powerful man in the city. Giuseppe rushed forward with a chair, a glass of water, a napkin, everything and nothing that could help. Waiters scattered to reassure shaken diners that everything was under control. Aaliyah collapsed into her seat, mascara streaming down her face in black rivers. Her sobs filled the space between relief and performance, loud enough that Leonardo suspected they had more to do with processing the drama than genuine concern for his survival. She'd been dating him for 6 weeks, long enough to enjoy the expensive dinners, not long enough to actually care whether he lived or died. Dr. Morrison stood frozen, his face the color of old newspaper. The physician who'd been kept on retainer for 5 years, who'd collected generous paychecks for doing essentially nothing, had just failed spectacularly. At the one moment his expertise was actually needed. His humiliation was a living thing, visible in the way his hands trembled and his eyes couldn't meet anyone's gaze. Marcus and Tony exchanged a glance that needed no words. Their entire job was keeping Leonardo Gatti alive, and they'd been useless when it mattered most. This waitress with calloused hands had accomplished what all their training, all their weapons, all their muscle couldn't touch. They owed her everything, and both men knew debts like that didn't come with price tags. Leonardo's throat felt like he'd swallowed broken glass, but he managed to force out words in a voice he barely recognized. "What's your name?" "What?" Anna had already turned to leave, but she paused and looked back. "Anna Phillips, sir." Her tone was respectful, but not deferential. The way someone might speak to a customer, rather than a crime lord. "Just catch your breath. You're going to be fine." She started walking away. Actually, walking away, back toward the service station where other waitresses were staring in stunned disbelief. She moved as if saving a Mafia boss's life was just another Tuesday night shift, as if performing miracles when trained physicians failed was simply part of her job description. Leonardo watched her go, unable to look away. Something was shifting in his chest that had nothing to do with the choking. Something deeper and more unsettling. She had shown no fear when approaching him, expected no reward for saving him, asked for no favor or payment or acknowledgement beyond basic courtesy. Who was this woman who walked away from leverage that could have set her up for life? Who treated power and vulnerability with the same quiet competence? Who possessed knowledge that modern medicine had forgotten? Leonardo needed answers. And Leonardo Gatti always got what he needed. The next morning, Leonardo sat in his office nursing espresso that tasted like ash and a throat that felt like he'd gargled razor blades. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city he controlled. But his mind was elsewhere, back in that restaurant, watching a waitress walk away from power like it meant nothing. Marcus appeared in the doorway before being summoned, reading his boss the way he'd learned to over 15 years. "You want to know about her?" "Number 4. "Everything," Leonardo said, his damaged voice turning the word into gravel. "The waitress who saved me, Anna Phillips. I want to know everything." Marcus nodded and disappeared. Within 24 hours, a manila folder landed on Leonardo's desk, with the quiet weight of secrets revealed. Anna Phillips, 34 years old. Current residence: a 1-bedroom apartment in the South District that rented for more than it was worth. 3 jobs: evening shifts at Castello Rosso, morning shifts at Mel's Diner on 5th Street, weekend catering gigs that paid cash under the table. She worked 90-hour weeks and had for the past 18 months. The reason was, in the medical records Marcus had obtained through channels that didn't ask questions. James Phillips, age 16. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia. Diagnosis: 14 months ago. Prognosis: treatable with aggressive chemotherapy and possible bone marrow transplant. Estimated cost: $400,000 minimum. Insurance status: denied. The Phillips family plan had classified James's leukemia as a pre-existing condition through some bureaucratic loophole that existed solely to protect corporate profit margins. Appeals had been filed and rejected. Second opinions had been sought and couldn't change the paperwork. Hospitals demanded payment up front. Clinical trials required insurance coverage they didn't have. James was being turned away from treatment that could save his life because Anna Phillips, working 3 jobs and 90-hour weeks, couldn't produce money that didn't exist. Leonardo read the file alone in his office, the city sprawling below him like a kingdom he'd conquered through violence and fear. But Anna's story hit him somewhere, that violence couldn't touch. She was sacrificing everything, sleep, health, any semblance of normal life, to protect her younger brother, working herself to exhaustion for a chance to save someone she loved, just like his mother had done. Francesca Gatti, stepping between her son and his father's fist, choosing protection over self-preservation, dying to keep Leonardo safe. Anna Phillips was his mother 20 years later, fighting a different kind of violence with the same desperate love. The system was killing her brother as surely as Antonio's fist had killed Francesca, just slower and with more paperwork. Leonardo closed the folder and reached for his phone. Some debts demanded payment, regardless of whether they'd been requested. Leonardo's conference room held 8 men who collectively controlled more of the city than the mayor ever would. Victor Calabrese, his second in command, sat closest to the head of the table. Frank Numbers Romano handled the financial operations. Tommy Ricci managed the labor unions. Each man had earned his position through loyalty, proven in blood. They'd been summoned without explanation, which meant something significant was about to happen. Leonardo stood at the window, his back to them, watching traffic crawl through streets his organization had owned for decades. When he finally spoke, his voice still carried the rasp of near death. "I'm calling in every favor we have in the medical community. Hospital administrators, insurance executives, pharmaceutical reps, everyone who owes us." The men exchanged glances but remained silent. "There's a 16-year-old kid named James Phillips dying of leukemia because his insurance company decided profits matter more than lives. I want the best oncologist in the state treating him. I want his insurance reconsidering their denial with extreme urgency. I want experimental treatments that are suddenly available. And I want all of this done yesterday." Victor cleared his throat carefully. He'd worked alongside Leonardo long enough to know when to tread lightly. "Boss, with all respect, this is significant exposure for someone who's not connected to the family. People will ask questions. They'll want to know why we're burning favors on a civilian kid." Leonardo turned from the window. His expression could have frozen mercury. "His sister saved my life when everyone else failed. When our doctor couldn't. When our training couldn't. When our money and power and connections meant absolutely nothing. She stepped forward and kept me alive, using knowledge her grandmother taught her in a desert halfway around the world." He let that sink in before continuing. "That makes her connected. That makes her family. And anyone who has a problem with that decision can discuss it with me personally." The emphasis on personally carried unmistakable weight. No one spoke. "Frank, you'll handle the anonymous donation. $2 million to St. Catherine's Hospital, earmarked for pediatric cancer treatment. Make sure James Phillips's name ends up on the right list." Numbers nodded, already calculating routing paths that would make the money untraceable. "Tommy, you know people at Empire Health Insurance. I want James's denial reversed by end of business tomorrow. I don't care what strings you pull or whose arms you twist. Consider it done, boss." Within 48 hours, the machinery Leonardo had built through decades of calculated pressure began producing miracles. St. Catherine's Hospital received an anonymous donation that hospital administrators couldn't refuse or trace. James Phillips was suddenly accepted into an experimental trial that had been full the previous week. Empire Health Insurance mysteriously reversed their denial, citing administrative review of coverage guidelines. Dr. Caroline Newman, the state's leading pediatric oncologist, received a phone call suggesting she take on one more patient. She agreed before understanding why agreeing felt less like choice than survival instinct. Anna arrived at St. Catherine's Hospital on Tuesday morning, prepared for the same answer she'd received for 14 months. Her brother's treatment remained unaffordable. His insurance still denied, his options still non-existent. She'd brought James anyway because giving up felt like betrayal. even when hope had been beaten down to almost nothing. The receptionist looked up with an expression Anna had never seen before, something approaching warmth instead of the usual apologetic dismissal. "Phillips? James Phillips? Dr. Caroline is expecting you. Third floor. Oncology wing." Anna's stomach dropped. "There's been some mistake. We don't have an appointment with Dr. Caroline. We can't afford. Third floor," the receptionist repeated, smiling now. "They're waiting. They're waiting. They're waiting. They're waiting. They're waiting. They're waiting." Dr. Caroline Newman met them in a consultation room that smelled like hope and antiseptic. She was younger than Anna expected, with kind eyes that had seen too much death, and hands that had saved too many lives to count. "James, Anna, I'm glad you're here. We're going to start treatment immediately. I can't afford this." Anna's voice cracked on the words she'd said too many times. "There's been some mistake. Our insurance doesn't cover." "The bill has been handled, doctor," Caroline interrupted gently. "An anonymous donation to our pediatric cancer program. Your brother qualifies. Your insurance company has also reversed their denial. I received confirmation this morning." Anna felt the room tilt. "That's impossible. We've been appealing for over a year. Sometimes impossible things happen, doctor." Caroline's expression suggested she understood more than she was saying. "Your only job now is to be here for your brother. Let us handle the rest." It took Anna 3 days to piece together enough fragments to understand what had happened. A waitress overhearing things at Castello Rosso learned quickly which topics were dangerous to discuss. But she also learned to recognize patterns: anonymous donations, sudden insurance reversals, miracles that followed specific timelines. She worked her next shift at Castello Rosso with her heart hammering against her ribs. When Leonardo arrived at his usual table, she approached with the same calm she'd shown when saving his life. No fear, no hesitation, just purpose. "I don't know how to thank you," she said quietly. Leonardo looked up from the menu he never actually read. His throat had healed, but his eyes carried something different now, something softer than the cold calculation she'd seen that night. "You already did. You showed me that real strength isn't about power or fear. It's about acting when everyone else freezes." He paused, something painful crossing his features. "My mother tried to teach me that 20 years ago. You reminded me." 6 months later, James Phillips was in remission. Anna wore a manager's pin on her uniform. Giuseppe had retired unexpectedly, citing health reasons no one quite believed. Leonardo visited every Thursday, not for business meetings or territorial discussions, but for the tiramisu that Anna insisted he try, and for the company of someone who saw him as the man he was trying to become rather than the monster he'd been. His empire still operated in shadows and violence. But now there was a foundation attached to it, anonymous, untraceable, funding medical care for families the system had abandoned. His hard heart had found redemption through a waitress's courage and ancient wisdom that proved some things matter more than power. Sometimes, saving a life means more than taking one. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you believe that sometimes the greatest power is knowing when to show mercy, and that redemption can come from the most unexpected places, subscribe and comment where you're watching from. Only those who've never needed saving won't understand.